guys, it's Kelsey from Burr Coffee here. Today I thought it would be a great opportunity to walk you through a pour over at your house. I'm at my house right now and I'm sure many of you are as well, and I thought it would be really cool and maybe informative to walk through a pour over. Now all of the equipment I'm using today is from Target. So sometimes brewing coffee at home can seem really overwhelming, especially if you're wanting to do pour overs, because equipment is expensive, it's hard to find, you have to order it online, it's not readily available. And so I have picked up a few things from Target to walk through this process. Now Target is still open, so if you're needing some groceries or something, now's a great opportunity to get some coffee stuff. So we are gonna be using the Bodum pour over, and this one kind of reminds me of a Chemex, which kind of drew me in, but it's this glass pour over thing. You have a little mesh filter. I'm not a huge fan of the mesh filter, so I'm going to show you how I use that with a paper filter. And then I have a Bodum gooseneck electric kettle. This one is really nice and aesthetically pleasing, so if you're interested in that, this is a great option. And this is $35. I think this guy is $15. I'm also using a grinder, and this one is from Cuisinart. Grinders are hard. Grinders are the really expensive point of coffee, and while I definitely recommend investing in a nice grinder, this one can get you through in a pinch, and if you're not wanting to spend hundreds of dollars on a grinder, I think this one was $50 at Target. So everything that we're using is under $100. Or right around $100, which is really nice and approachable. Before we jump into making the pour over, I wanted to share a few things with you. One, there is a wonderful app if you are into coffee apps. Now this is only on iOS, so it's only for Apple, which is kind of the bummer, but I'm sure there's other options out there. But this one is my favorite. I tell all new baristas to download this app because it's just fantastic and it is just interesting and super helpful. So it's called Slowbar, and it's really cool. This is the home screen. You would just pick whatever pour over you're wanting to do. So in our shops, we use the Kalita Wave, which we feel is a really great, consistent pour over. It's hard to mess up, and it tastes great. You've got a nice filter on it. And so we use that, which they do have a recipe for. But there's everything on here. There's Chemex, AeroPress, French press, Kalitas, V60, there's just a lot of options on here, and then it's going to walk you through ratios, how much coffee you should use, how much water you should use, and then literally walk you through every step of pouring a pour over. And it was it's so good. It was game changer for me when I found that app, because like I said earlier, pour overs are just kind of this unknown kind of thing. And if you're just making pour overs at home and you're a coffee enthusiast, it's kind of hard to find great directions, and so highly recommend the Slowbar app. Like I said earlier, we're gonna be using this Bodum pour over, and I'm gonna add a paper filter to this. You could just use the mesh filter with this, so you don't have to buy anything excess, you don't have to go through paper products, and so that is a great option. I just personally want a little bit of a cleaner cup of coffee, so there's not gonna be a lot of oils in it, so for that reason, I'm gonna add a paper filter. Oh, you know what? I forgot to talk about our scale. We're using a Taylor kitchen scale. I think this was $10 as well. So for our ratios today, we're gonna be using a 1:15 ratio. I'm gonna be weighing in grams today. It's just a little bit more precise, and you can therefore make a consecutive cup of coffee, and it's gonna be really similar. And like I said, we'll be using a 1:15 ratio. So that means for every gram of coffee, so 1 gram of coffee, we're gonna use 15 grams of water. Your water, you do want it filtered, so we just have a Brita sitting on the counter that filters our water, and so I just grabbed some water from there, so we're all set. I'm gonna get that heated up, because it does take a few minutes, especially for starting from a cooler temperature of water. But I do need to get my coffee weighed out. The nice thing about the Cuisinart grinder is it does come with this little removable capsule, and this is actually what the coffee is going to grind into. For beans today, I'm using the 28th and Hennepin from Burr Coffee. All of our coffees are single origin, meaning that they come from one region of a country. So this one is in Ethiopia, Chelchel, and that means that they came from the Chelchel region of Ethiopia. The reason that single origin are really nice is that it kind of reflects the region. So if a region grows a lot of cacao as well as coffee, the coffee is going to taste a little bit like what's growing in the area. So that's why single origin is really cool, because you get to taste the region. You get to taste what's there. How we describe this coffee is pear, dandelion, and honeydew. And so it's definitely going to be on the fruitier, florally side, and that's why it's this one. So our 28th and Hennepin line is going to be something fruity, whereas our other coffees are going to offer some other flavors as far as like chocolatey or kind of something balanced. But this one is my favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and weigh out 24 grams of coffee. I'm sorry, this is kind of hard to see. I was trying to make sure everything was in the frame, but it's a little hard to see like precise things down here. I'll explain well, I guess. Gonna make sure this is set to grams and weigh 24 grams out. Now I've got my 24 grams of coffee. I'm gonna go ahead and pour it into the top of the grinder. And every pour over option is different as far as how you want to grind your beans. The most important thing with a grinder, I should have said this earlier, is that you want a Burr Grinder. That means it doesn't have a blade like spinning. It has two like mechanisms that have like little teeth on them, and the bottom one stays in place and the top one turns. And so it's gonna crush the coffee instead of like cutting it into little tiny pieces. With blade grinders, you don't get a lot of consistency. You get a lot of like unevenness in the size of coffee that you are left with. So you might have like some like really big chunks, and you might have some like little tiny chunks, and there's not really any control with it. I mean, you could grind it for longer if you wanted, and that might get it finer, but you might also end up with like really uneven consistency in your ground coffee. A Burr Grinder is gonna lead to a lot more consistency. You're gonna get a more even cup of coffee, and it's just better. So with this pour over and like the double filter situation I'm gonna do like a medium grind, because it has to go through both filters, like the water's got to go through both. So I'm gonna do it a little bit coarser so that I'm not like restricting the flow of water too much, because that's gonna leave you with a not super great tasting cup of coffee. So I'm gonna leave it at a medium, and I'm gonna grind it. It's gonna be loud, so I'll be right back. My dog did not like the sound of the grinder. So inside of the mesh filter, I'm also gonna be using a number 3 filter. I think this is a number 3, maybe it's a number 4. I'll figure it out and leave it down below, but I think it's a number 3. And then what I'm gonna do, I actually already pre-wetted this on accident, and so you're gonna fold the lines of the seams on the bottom and the side, and then I'm just gonna stick that into the mesh filter here. Now, it's not a perfect fit, I'm not gonna lie. Like, this isn't the best filter for this, but it's the best I've found. I've tried V60 filters and kind of like folding them at the bottom, because they're just like a pure triangle. I tried Chemex filters without this, just in here, but it was too big of a hole to hold the Chemex filter. I've tried a few things, and this is kind of the best option I've come up with. So it's not a perfect fit, like I said, but it works. It works in a pinch. Before we get going with the coffee, I'm going to wet my filter. Even though mine's already wet, I just am gonna do it again to show you. So you always wanna wet your filter. My water is hot now, so I'm just gonna pour it through the filter. And it's just helps reduce the paper taste you're gonna get with the filter. It's also just gonna make the paper like ready to take the coffee in the simplest terms. And so I'm going to remove the filter, and I'm gonna pour the water that's in here into my sink. Now, an important step here that I like to do, and is probably recommended, I've got everything on my scale, but it says 347 grams. So I'm gonna tear that out, meaning it's gonna go to 0. So when I add my coffee, I can make sure I have the right amount. So my coffee's in the little grinder capsule here, and I'm just gonna pour that into the filter, trying to avoid like the edges and just kind of aiming for the middle of the bottom of the filter. So I've got 25 grams somehow. There's probably like a bean stuck in the grinder, but I'm just going to take out a little tiny bit until I get to 24. There we go, perfect. And since my water has been sitting for a while, I'm gonna turn it back on to make sure it's at the right temperature. And while I do that, I'm going to take my filter here and just kind of even it out a little bit. You want the coffee to be at a nice even surface. Water's almost done. What have you guys been doing recently to like keep you occupied throughout this like stay inside? I've been cleaning a lot. Cleaned my downstairs yesterday. I've been trying new recipes. I've been doing some crocheting and just trying to keep busy while I'm here. But we are still open at all 3 of our locations, so I'm still keeping busy at work, just shorter days right now. We're open from 8 to 3 at all locations, just by the way. All right, our water is ready. I'm gonna go ahead and tear out my scale again. And I am going to use my phone for a timer. All right, we're at 0 grams on the scale. I'm gonna pour 50 grams of water and like start my timer at the same time, and then let it sit for 30 seconds. And that's called the bloom period in like a coffee pour over. You want to let it sit for a second because it's gonna release a bunch of gases, because gas happens when you roast coffee. This is freshly roasted. I think the roast date was just a few days ago, so I wanna make sure to get rid of all of those gases so then the coffee is ready to accept water again. So I'm gonna go ahead, start my timer, aim for 50 grams of water. You wanna pour nice and slow, an even coat of water over the coffee. And I like to pour in a clockwise motion. It doesn't have to be clockwise, it can be counterclockwise if you'd like, but you wanna keep it consistent. So we're at 30 seconds. I'm gonna keep pouring for about like 100, 150 more grams. The key is that you wanna keep the coffee nice and saturated in water, but you don't wanna fill it up all the way, but you also don't want it to like dry completely out. You want to keep it kind of in the middle range of the filter. And then you're just going to keep going, and we're aiming for 360 grams of water today. So slow and steady, clockwise motions. I do feel like pouring the water from the kettle is usually one of the hardest things for people to kind of like figure out. It's so tempting to just dump a bunch of water in, or you feel like you're pouring a little bit, but you're actually pouring like super unevenly. You want to keep it a nice, steady, slow pour. So I literally will have baristas just like pour water into something so that they can practice pouring a nice, slow stream of water. So we're at 230 grams, and it's been 1 minute and 50 seconds on our brew. We're aiming for like a 4-minute brew time on this one, but brew devices and filters kind of change that. And also, I said earlier we were doing a 1:15 ratio. The ratio is totally up to you. 1:15 is just a good starting point. You might like 1:15 on one kind of coffee and 1:17 on another kind of coffee. It just kind of depends. You got to feel it out. You got to come up with your own recipe. You got to figure out what you like. And so 1:15 is a good place to start. I personally like a little bit of like a higher ratio of water in my coffee. I tend to get like a stomach ache if I do it too strong, or if I'm at somewhere, I miss going to places, but if I'm at somewhere drinking a pour over and it's a little too strong, it just kind of like hurts my stomach a little bit. And so I actually go to like a 1:16, 1:17 ratio, and that's kind of my favorite. Last pour of water here, going up to 360. Perfect. And we're at 3 minutes and 20 seconds. So by 4 minutes, we should definitely be all drained through. And so that's where you're gonna know if you're off too with your grind, is if it's taking way too long for it to pour through and finish. That means your grind's a little bit too fine. And if it pours through in like 2 minutes is just way too fast, your grinds are just a little bit too coarse. So you're gonna wanna tighten up your grinder, and if it's the opposite, you wanna kind of loosen it a little bit. All right, we are just done, and it was at 4 minutes. Something that I did appreciate about this Bodum pour over is that it comes with this like little top guy, and you can put it in your pour over. So then if you made like a larger one, or maybe you just didn't want to drink all of it in a cup, or it doesn't all fit in a mug, you've got something on top to kind of like keep it secure, keep it a little bit warmer until you're ready to drink it. But I'm gonna grab a mug and try it out. One of my favorites, a nice vintage Pyrex mug. It's beautiful. Pretty hot. I usually like to let mine sit for a little bit. Yeah, that tastes pretty good. Now, if you wanted to up the amount of coffee you were making, so like this can definitely hold a lot more coffee than what I made, you would just essentially double the recipe or like use math and figure out how much you needed to get. So like my outcome was about 1.5 mugs. So if you wanted to get it to like 2 mugs, you could just kind of like use that 1:15 ratio, but add a little bit more coffee. So say you did 30 grams instead of 24 grams, then you would just take 30 times it by 15, and that'll give you your water amount, and you can just adjust the amount of coffee you're making. But thanks so much for joining me. I hope you found this video informative, or like it helped in some way, or you just like hanging out with me or something. Thank you. But that's it. I'm gonna enjoy my coffee, and then I actually need to get back to work, so hope this little coffee break was great. Bye!